and gentlemen, and thank you for watching the show. This is your Top Think Tanks review, and I'm your host, Bryce Dolan. Today on the show, we're going to look at 4 of the top 50 United States think tanks, but still cover 5 stories. The reason being we're only covering 4 top think tanks is because most of these think tanks today had an article or their top story was about the US election or the new president-elect Donald Trump. So in order to kind of break the stories up today to get off the topic of politics and the new US president, I did use Human Rights Watch twice in today's show so that we can get some different articles and some different variety so we don't have to talk about politics and the new US president the entire show. But be prepared, there are a few articles on the new president-elect Donald Trump and the US election. To begin the show, Human Rights Watch said United States President-elect Donald Trump should abandon campaign rhetoric that seemed to reject many of the United States' core human rights obligations and put rights at the heart of his administration's domestic and foreign policy agendas. The US presidential campaign was dominated by a number of controversial statements and policy proposals by Trump. When announcing his intent to run for president in June of 2015, Trump stated, "When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people." He also proposed banning Muslims from entering the United States. Now, President-elect Trump will inherit enormous global and domestic human rights challenges when he takes office in January 2017, including how to address the U.S. role in conflicts where a crushing toll in civilian lives has become the norm, whether in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, or Yemen. In Yemen, the United States has become a party to an armed conflict that has seen its ally Saudi Arabia inflict devastating and indiscriminate violence on the country's civilian population. Now that he has secured victory, President-elect Trump should move from the headline-grabbing rhetoric of hatred and govern with respect for all who live in the United States, said Kenneth Roth, executive director at Human Rights Watch. Here is more of what Mr. Roth had to say about the election results.
The American presidential campaign was extraordinarily ugly, with racism, misogyny, and xenophobia infecting much of the rhetoric. But governing is different. As Donald Trump has said, he has to be president for all Americans, and it's important that we hold him to that. Rights are not something that an electoral majority can simply vote away. That's not the American way. That's not what international human rights law requires, and that's not what's good for America's standing in the world. It's important that Donald Trump recognize that a strong president is not somebody who dumps on the marginalized and disadvantaged. A strong president stands up for the rights of everyone, all residents of the United States and people around the world as well. We need to ensure that a Trump presidency does that.
I couldn't have said it any better myself. Now next, the Council on Foreign Relations says the world reacts with concern and support after Trump is elected. World leaders began reacting to the surprising rise of Donald Trump to the US presidency, warming up to the new leader or urging caution over moves he might make. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called Trump a true friend of Israel and received an invitation to visit the president-elect soon, according to a Trump aide. The president-elect also received expressions of support from leaders including those of Australia, Belarus, Hungary, Kazakhstan, and the Philippines. European Parliament President Martin Schulz said that the Trump win constitutes a difficult moment in EU-US relations, and EU leaders invited the president-elect to Brussels. French President François Hollande called on Trump to clarify his positions on critical issues like terrorism, conflict, and conflicts in the Middle East, and climate change, while Iran's foreign minister Javad Zarif called on him to respect last year's nuclear weapons agreement, which Trump vowed in his campaign to undo. Japanese Prime Minister is expected to meet with Trump in New York next week, according to the Japan Times. Now, the resonance of this US election campaign is truly enormous in every corner of the world. But despite much disgust about the mudslinging, it is not necessarily all that negative. Observers everywhere may be astounded that a candidate so arrogantly ignorant in international affairs could gather so much support. But that has also given them a great understanding of the global stakes in this moment of choice. Paradoxical as it may seem, many people now have greater appreciation of the value of US leadership and of their interest in preserving it, said Pavel Bayev, who writes for the Brookings Institution. Now, I reposted that quote from Mr. Bayev because that was just incredible to me. That, I think, spoke to, or can speak to, Trump supporters and anti-Trump people, because it's basically saying, hey, we have the power to control this. We have the power to preserve US leadership and choose who our leader is. So even though this is an ugly election and now we're having some ugly protests and riots after the election, it was all for kind of a greater good, so to speak, to kind of give American people a greater sense of appreciation of the value of voting for a US president. Now next, the Brookings Institution takes a more specific approach to Trump's presidency. At the international climate negotiations in Morocco, the mood after the election is deeply uneasy as the United States' role in such efforts is now uncertain. The US has over recent years forged a role as a global leader on clean energy and climate change. At the federal level, the Obama administration oversaw a number of regulatory actions that collectively have driven down overall US emissions and have been on track to a roughly 17% reduction from 2005 levels by 2020. Now, long-standing high investment in energy research and development has paid off in technological advances. States and local jurisdictions have been expanding their own renewable energy goals and improving their preparedness for climate-driven extreme weather events. The US was a key force behind the recent international agreement to include all countries, including the world's biggest emitter, China, in a rational, robust, and country-based approach to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. Donald Trump's election raises the question of whether the US will continue to be a leader on climate change and clean energy. After a long and arduous process with strong US leadership to organize international action on climate change, momentum had been built behind the current process of nationally determined goals and nationally designed strategies. Within the United States, there will be questions about whether climate strategy will be undone. So the Brookings Institution, like we said at the beginning, is taking a more specific approach to Trump's election and questioning the legitimacy of his climate change or clean energy roles and his agendas on those two policies. So only time will tell for this entire Trump election to see if he was the right choice for the United States and to see if the United States is going to rise or if we're going to fall or if we're going to stay at a flat line. So only time will tell, ladies and gentlemen. But getting off that political topic, we help remember America's veterans with the Center for American Progress, especially those who have given their lives or suffered physical or mental wounds in the course of defending this great nation. We also pay tribute to the families who have lost a loved one, suffered from the wounds of war, and dealt with frequent deployments away from home in order to make this service possible. As we remember the sacrifices made by all veterans since the nation's founding, we especially thank those still putting their lives on the line on our behalf around the world, particularly in the fight against the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham and the continuing struggle against the Taliban in Afghanistan, as well as other terrorist groups. More than 15 years after 9/11, the United States still has thousands of troops fighting against al-Qaeda and its offshoots in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. Many more troops are deployed elsewhere around the globe to protect the nation's interests and promote its values. In addition, we must continue to provide the best possible care and support for both those who have and those who will come home from their deployments. The challenges still facing our service members and veterans range from dealing with physical and mental injuries to unemployment and homelessness. The President and Congress must continue to work together to take care of our men and women in uniform, particularly as they navigate the difficult transition from military service to the civilian sector. Now, here are some facts about our veterans. Approximately 21 million veterans are currently living in the United States. About 3 million veterans are from the post-9/11 era. According to the most recent data, 40,571 male veterans and 2,637 female veterans died by suicide between 2000 and 2010. Female veterans committed suicide at rates more than 5 times greater than female civilians in the same time frame, and the suicide rate for women rose 83% between 2001 to 2014, compared with 40% among their civilian counterparts. The risk of suicide is 21% higher when compared with civilian adults. Young veterans between the ages of 18 and 29 face the greatest risk of suicide. Suicide rates among veterans in this age range are nearly 5 times higher for men and more than 10 times higher for women than suicide rates among their counterparts in the civilian population. So we're doing this article, ladies and gentlemen, to draw attention to our veterans, as Veterans Day is tomorrow, November 11th. And we want to respect and appreciate all of our veterans and current service men and women who are serving by giving them the proper respect and appreciation they need. And by doing that, you need to also admit and address that our veterans need more help than regular civilians do here in the United States, especially when the servicemen and women become veterans after they've fought in wars or after they've gone through any type of military experience. Some need help with their PTSD, with their depression, with the suicide rates are obviously different. So we can't just brush these guys under the rug or just appreciate them for one day out of the year. So I hope you take these suicide statistics, but these military statistics for these veterans and these servicemen and women, and you use it and keep it in your knowledge and keep it at the front for an entire year rather than just one day, and show appreciation to your veterans. Now, to end the show, we go back to Human Rights Watch, and Iraqi and Kurdistan regional government forces have now detained at least 37 men from areas around Mosul, suspected of being affiliated with the Islamic State since the beginning of the Mosul operation. So again, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go back here with a little update from Mosul, but we're getting off the presidential and the election topics. Now, Human Rights Watch spoke to 46 relatives and witnesses who described how security forces took the men from checkpoints, villages, screening centers, and camps for displaced people. Most said they did not know where the men are being held, and all of them said that the men have not been able to contact them while in detention. On top of the danger and anxiety facing civilians fleeing ISIS control, some are now being detained and denied contact with their families by Iraqi and KRG authorities, said Lama Faki, Deputy Middle East Director for Human Rights Watch. When detainees are held without contact with the outside world in unknown locations, that significantly increases the risk of other violations, including ill treatment and torture. Iraqi and KRG authorities should make efforts to inform family members, either directly or indirectly, including through camp management officials, about the location of all detainees. The authorities should make public the number of fighters and civilians detained, including at checkpoints, screening sites, and camps during the conflict with ISIS, and the legal basis for their detention, including the charges against them. Now, Iraqi and KRG authorities should ensure prompt, individual judicial review of detention and allow detainees to have access to lawyers and medical care and to communicate with their families. So this is kind of what I put it in perspective for my fiance. I told her, let's imagine we're on a walk one night, we're just walking the dogs, and all of a sudden we get stopped, I get taken, and you don't know why, you don't know where I'm going, and you never hear from me. I can't imagine like that's something happening. But that is happening to these people, ladies and gentlemen. That is happening to these innocent male civilians who are just trying to escape ISIS and who are just trying to flee Mosul to find safety. I understand the fact that you don't know who's associated with ISIS, and it's really hard to figure out who's associated with ISIS. But to just arbitrarily detain individuals without any communication, no charges, nothing, is just unheard of. And I can't even imagine of something like that happening to me. So, along with the veterans in our thoughts and our prayers, these detainees are as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can find the links to these articles and their respective websites below in the description. I encourage you to check them all out. This does it for your Top Think Tanks review. I want to thank you for watching the show. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter. But thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. This was your Top Think Tanks review.